I found my sister in my fiancé's hotel room, 9 hours before our engagement party. And the only thing I did was take the ring off the nightstand, walk out, and let the elevator doors close on both of their faces. My family begged me to forgive her. I packed a bag instead, drove until the highway signs stopped making sense, and disappeared for 6 years. Last month my father called me crying, asking me to save the house. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Let me back up to the night before everything ended. My name is Jonah Pratt. I was 31. My fiancée was a woman named Briar Calloway, together 5 years, engaged for 14 months. The engagement party was set for a Saturday evening at the Lakeview Club. In Charleston, 90 guests, the kind of event my mother had been planning since I was 22, and she decided Briar was the one. I'd paid for half the catering myself, $11,000. Because that's what you do when you love someone. And you're building toward a wedding 8 months out. My younger sister Sable was 27. She'd moved back to Charleston that spring. After a divorce nobody in the family liked to talk about, and I'd let her crash in my guest room for 2 months while she found her footing. I drove her to job interviews. I co-signed a car loan for her because her credit was wrecked. I told everyone who asked that my sister was going through a rough patch, and she needed support. Not judgment. The night before the party, Briar told me she was staying at a hotel downtown with her bridesmaids. Some kind of pre-party tradition her friends wanted to do. Mimosas and getting their hair done in the morning before the event. I dropped off the welcome bags myself around 9, little gift boxes with her name, and her friends' names on them, because I'm the kind of person who does things himself instead of asking someone else to. The front desk gave me the room number without blinking. I knocked. No answer. But I could hear the television low, and voices under it. I had the spare key card Briar had given me earlier that day, in case anyone needed extra ice or towels. I let myself in. Sable was sitting on the edge of the bed in one of the hotel robes. Briar was standing by the window in her engagement dress, the one she was supposed to wear in 8 months. Half zipped, makeup half done. A wine glass forgotten on the dresser. They weren't doing anything in that frozen photograph sense. People imagine when they hear this story, no one was undressed. But the air in that room told me everything. Before either of them said a word, Sable's phone was open on the bed, a thread of messages between her and Briar going back months, and the last line on the screen, sent 20 minutes before I walked in, said something about how Sable couldn't keep doing this to me. To her own brother. And Briar's reply just said one more night, then we figure it out together. I read that line standing in the doorway in my coat, holding a gift bag with my sister's name written on it, in my own handwriting from earlier that week. Nobody moved for what felt like a long time. I counted it later, lying awake. 8 seconds. 8 seconds of my sister looking at the carpet, and my fiancé looking at me, like she was waiting for the floor to open. I set the gift bag down on the dresser, next to the wine glass. I picked up the engagement ring, the one I'd put on Briar's hand 14 months earlier at her parents' lake house, sitting there on the nightstand because she'd taken it off to do her makeup. I put it in my coat pocket. I walked out. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, because I didn't want to stand next to either of them in a small metal box. But it didn't matter. Because Briar caught the elevator, and we ended up in the lobby at the same moment anyway, and the doors closed on both their faces while I kept walking toward the parking garage. I didn't call anyone that night. I drove to my apartment, packed nothing, sat on my kitchen floor until almost 4 in the morning, and watched my phone light up over and over. 19 missed calls, 6 from Briar, 5 from Sable, 4 from my mother Carol, 3 from my father Russ, 1 from my best friend Tobias, who was supposed to be my best man. At 6 a.m. I opened one text. It was from my mother, sent at 1:15. She said, Sable told us everything. We're shocked but please do not cancel the party tonight. People are flying in. We can handle the rest privately as a family. Briar made a mistake. But she loves you. And your sister is fragile right now after the divorce. Don't blow up everyone's night over something we can work through. Something we can work through. My mother had just learned that my fiancé and my sister had been carrying on for months, possibly longer. And her first instinct was to protect the seating chart. I opened one from Tobias instead. He just said, Jonah, where are you? I heard something happened. Call me. I called him back. He picked up before the first ring finished. I told him everything in about 90 seconds. Flat, no inflection, the way you talk when you haven't slept and you're not sure you're a real person yet. He didn't say calm down. He didn't say are you sure, he said. What do you need? I said I need you to call the Lakeview Club and cancel the room reservation under my name before my mother does it for me. And I need you to come get my truck out of the garage because I don't trust myself to drive it right now. He came. He didn't ask questions in the car. He just drove me to a motel off Highway 17, the kind with a parking lot, facing the rooms, and waited while I checked in under a name that wasn't quite mine. By noon my mother had called 4 more times. I let one through. She was crying before I said hello. She said, Jonah, please, we can fix this. I said, Fix what exactly? She said. Your sister is devastated. She says it happened slowly. She didn't mean for it to go this far. And Briar is hysterical. The caterer needs an answer about tonight. I said there is no tonight. Call the caterer yourself. I'm not doing it. She said. You can't just walk away from your family over this. I said. I'm not walking away from my family. I'm walking away from the two people who decided my engagement was a competition they were allowed to enter. My father got on the phone. He said. Son, come home. We'll talk this through as a family. Families survive things like this, I said. What does surviving look like here, Dad? Sable move out tomorrow. Does Briar give the ring back herself, instead of leaving it on a nightstand for me to find? He didn't answer either question. He said. We're asking you to give your sister grace. She's been through a lot this year, I said. So have I, as of about 14 hours ago, and nobody's offering me any. I told him not to call that number again. He called the next morning anyway. I changed it within the hour. The party never happened. The Lakeview Club kept the deposit, $4,200. Because the cancellation came less than 72 hours out. Briar's parents were furious about the catering bill they'd split with us. None of that was my problem anymore. Monday, I called a lawyer, a guy named Holbrook, who handled small business contracts for some of the guys I worked construction with. I wasn't calling about the engagement. I was calling about my life. I told him I had a joint account with Briar, with about $9,000 in it, an apartment lease with 8 months left, and a job as a site foreman making $61,000 a year that suddenly felt like it belonged to a person I used to be. He asked if Briar's a signer on the account. I said yes. He said withdraw your half today. I took out $4,500 that afternoon. I gave notice on my job that Wednesday. My supervisor, a guy named Atlas Cohen, said take a leave. Don't make a permanent decision over a personal mess. I said this isn't a mess, this is a demolition. And I'm the one holding the wrecking ball now, might as well use it. He shook my hand and told me to call if I ever needed a reference. Thursday I loaded my truck, tools, clothes, my laptop, a lockbox with my documents, and my grandfather's level, the wooden one he gave me when I was 19, and started in the trade. That was everything I owned that mattered. Friday morning I drove west. I picked Tulsa because I'd worked a job site there for 3 weeks 2 summers earlier, and remembered liking the sky. How big and flat and indifferent it was. Like it had room for a person to disappear into it without anyone noticing. I rented a room in a house with 3 other guys, all between things, nobody asking questions. $600 a month. I worked a framing crew for $19 an hour, less than a third of what I'd been making, and I didn't care. Because my hands needed something to do that wasn't shaking. 3 weeks in, my mother found my new number. I never learned how. She called at 7 on a Thursday night. She said, "Thank God we've been so worried." I said that's funny, because I've been fine, which is the part you don't want to hear. She said you can't just vanish, you have a family. I said, I had a family. Until my sister decided my fiancé was available, and my mother decided the party mattered more than the betrayal. That family doesn't exist for me anymore. She said Sable is in therapy. She's trying to understand what made her do it. I said, I don't need her to understand it, I need her to live with it. She said, she's still your sister, I said. Watch me stop treating her like one. She asked about my father. I said tell him I'll call when I'm ready, and that might be never, and that's allowed to be true. I hung up. She called twice more that week. I changed my number again. 4 people had it after that. Tobias, Holbrook, Atlas for the reference, and my new landlord. That was my whole world for a long time, and it was enough. 6 weeks into Tulsa, the framing contractor, a man named Garrison Doyle, moved me into running a 4-man crew. $28 an hour. He said, you read a blueprint better than guys who've been doing this 20 years. Where'd you learn that? I said somewhere I'm not going back to. He said good enough for me. Keep showing up. Month 4, Garrison offered me a piece of a flip he was doing on the side. A duplex near downtown. I had $6,000 saved. We split materials, I did the labor on nights and weekends, he handled the sale. We cleared $31,000 in profit. My cut was just under $16,000. I put almost all of it back into the next one. While I was learning to read a market in Tulsa, Tobias kept me posted on Charleston. Not because I asked, but because he thought I deserved to know what I'd walked away from. Month 2. He texted that Sable and Briar were officially together. That my mother had started hosting Sunday dinners again. With both of them at the table. My old seat left empty with a place setting anyway. Like they were saving room for a ghost instead of admitting they'd buried him. Month 5. He texted that Briar was pregnant. My mother cried what he called happy tears at the dinner table. My father shook Sable's hand, like she'd plucked something. They celebrated a pregnancy that came out of the wreck of my engagement. Like it was a fresh start instead of evidence. Month 9. He texted that they'd named the baby Owen, after nobody in particular, just a name they liked. Except it was the name I'd told Briar, years earlier I wanted for a son someday, after a coach who'd meant something to me in high school. I put my phone in a drawer for 2 days after that one. Year 2. Garrison and I did 4 more flips together. I saved almost $70,000 and opened my own LLC, Pratt Restoration Group. First solo project was a rundown ranch house I picked up at auction for $98,000. 4 months of gutting it to the studs and rebuilding it right. Sold for $161,000. Profit after everything, just over $40,000. While I was learning how to run a business, my parents were learning how to fund one badly. Tobias texted that Sable and Briar wanted to open a boutique fitness studio together. That my parents had taken out a home equity line for $90,000 to back it. That my mother had co-signed the lease because neither of them had the credit alone. Neither of them had ever run a business in their lives. Sable had been fired from 2 retail jobs before the divorce for showing up late. My parents mortgaged 30 years of equity for a yoga studio, fronted by the 2 women who'd blown up my life. Year 3, my company had 3 employees, and revenue past $400,000. I bought a house, 3 bedrooms, a workshop in the back I built myself on weekends. $290,000, 65 down. The rest on a 15-year note. My monthly payment was less than I used to pay in rent and student debt combined back in Charleston. That same year, the studio failed. 11 months. Same as it always seems to take for things built on someone else's wreckage. They owed contractors and a landlord almost $26,000. My parents covered it with another draw on the HELOC. Briar and Sable's relationship didn't survive the failure either. Tobias texted that they'd split. That Briar had taken Owen and moved back in with her own parents 2 towns over. And that whatever had felt urgent and electric between her and my sister in that hotel room 2 years earlier had nothing underneath it once the excitement burned off. Year 4. My revenue crossed $1 million. I hired a 6th employee. I met a woman named Imogen at a lumber supplier's counter, arguing with the clerk about a delivery mix-up with more patience than I'd seen anyone show a stranger in years. We started talking, then started having coffee. Then she asked me to tell her about myself instead of just my company, and I told her everything: the hotel room, the ring on the nightstand, the 8 seconds. All of it. She listened all the way through without flinching. When I finished, she said, "You took the stairs instead of the elevator so you wouldn't have to stand next to them." That's either the most controlled thing I've ever heard or the saddest. I told her it was both. She said, "Then build something they can't touch." I said, "That's already what I'm doing," while Imogen and I built something together. Sable moved back into my parents' house. Into my old bedroom no less. 29 years old. And starting over from a guest room she used to visit me in. Tobias texted that my father had cashed out most of his retirement, around $55,000. To cover what was left of the studio's vendor debts. After a lawsuit threat from a contractor who'd never been paid for tile work, $55,000 of a man's retirement, gone for a business that lasted less than a year, run by the 2 people who broke his son. A few months ago, my mother hired a private investigator after years of nothing. The PI found my LLC registration but not my home address, because I'd registered the business to a UPS box on the other side of town out of habit more than fear by that point. He called Holbrook's office. Holbrook called me. I told him to tell the investigator I was alive, employed and not interested, and that if my mother got my address through him, I'd file a complaint myself. The calls stopped. Last month Tobias sent the longest message he'd ever written me. He said my parents were behind on the HELOC. And the original mortgage both. Almost $3,600 a month between them. And my father's part-time consulting income. Plus my mother's school district paycheck. Didn't come close to covering it. A foreclosure notice had been filed. Sable was still living there, working retail again, contributing almost nothing toward the house. He said my father's health wasn't good, blood pressure, stress, the kind of thing that catches up to a man all at once, after years of pretending it won't. 3 days after that text, my mother called from a new number, one I didn't recognize, and I picked up out of something close to curiosity, wanting to know what 6 years of consequences finally sounded like out loud. She said, "Jonah, please don't hang up." I said, "Talk." She said, "Everything's falling apart, the house is in foreclosure. Your father cashed his retirement for the studio debt. The studio failed. Sable and Briar split. Sable's living with us and not helping. We're going to lose the house your father and I have had for almost 30 years." I said. "I know," she said. "You know," I said, "Tobias tells me things. I've known about the $90,000 for the lease, the $26,000 in vendor debt, the $55,000 from Dad's retirement. I've known the whole time. I just never had a reason to call about it." She went quiet for a second, then said, "We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes, but we need you. You were always the one who fixed things in this family." I said, "I was. And instead of choosing the one who fixes things, you chose the ones who break them. And you asked me to give them grace while you offered me none." She said, "Sable is still your sister." I said. She stopped being that the night she sat on a hotel bed in a robe, while my fiancé tried on her engagement dress for someone else. She's a stranger who happens to share my last name now, and I've made my peace with that. she said. What about your father? He's 69, he has almost nothing left. I said Dad chose to drain his retirement for a business he knew nothing about. Run by two people who'd already proven what they were capable of. I didn't make that decision for him. He made it the same way he's been making decisions for 30 years by choosing the easier daughter over the harder truth. She asked if I was really going to let them lose the house. I sat with that question longer than she acted. Long enough that I could hear her breathing on the other end. Waiting, I said. Mom, 6 years ago I sat on a motel floor with $4,500, a truck full of tools, and a family that asked me to swallow my sister sleeping with my fiancé so a party wouldn't get canceled. I drove 1,400 miles to a city where nobody knew my name. I worked for $19 an hour and built a company out of a UPS box and a pickup truck. Nobody called to check on me back then. Nobody chose me. I chose myself, because none of you did it for me. And now you're calling because the daughter you protected destroyed what the son you forgot built for 30 years, and you need him to come fix it. The answer is, no. Jonah? I said, ask Sable, she's the one living there. Let her fix what she helped break. I hung up. She called twice more. I didn't pick up. A text came through later that night from my father's number instead, and I almost ignored it too, but something made me answer when it rang 20 minutes after. He said, son, I know your mother called. I'm asking you myself now. Man to man, I'm 69. My health isn't what it was. I gave almost everything I had left to a business. I knew it was a bad idea the day I signed the paperwork. Because your sister asked me to, and I didn't know how to say no to her. The way I never had trouble saying no to you. I'm saying that out loud for the first time. I chose wrong. I'm asking you to come home anyway and help me fix it. I said, Dad, you didn't choose wrong once. You chose wrong for 30 years, one favor at a time, until it added up to a foreclosure notice. I got a tux receipt and an empty ring box out of this family. I'm not coming home to save a house that was mortgaged for the people who broke me. He was crying. I'd heard my father raise his voice exactly twice in my life. I had never heard him cry until that phone call. He said, I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I said, I believe you, but sorry doesn't make a mortgage payment. And I'm not making one for a man who's been living rent-free in my old bedroom for 2 years, while you and Mom went under around her. He asked what they should do. I told him to sell the house before the bank took it for them, find something they could actually afford, and tell Sable to get a second job, or find her own place, because that's what I did 6 years ago, with a lot less to fall back on than either of them had. He asked if I'd come for the closing, if I'd be there. I said no. He asked if he'd ever see me again. I told him I honestly didn't know, and that it was the most honest thing I'd said to him in 6 years. After we hung up, I sat on my back porch in Tulsa, looking at the line of trees behind the workshop I'd built with my own hands, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Not satisfaction. Grief, old and specific, the kind that lives exactly where a family used to sit in your chest. Imogen came out and sat beside me without asking what happened. After a while she said, you okay? I said, my dad cried tonight. First time ever. She said, that's a hard kind of hard. I said, yeah. She said, you don't owe them anything, you know that. I said, I know it in my head. I'm just not all the way there in my chest yet. She put her hand over mine, and we sat there until the porch light was the only thing on in the yard. My parents' house sold 7 weeks later for $210,000. After the mortgage and the HELOC, they walked away with about $11,000. 30 years in that house reduced to $11,000 because every other dollar went to the daughter, who broke things. They're renting now, a 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from where the house used to be. My father's health hasn't improved. My mother picked up extra hours at the school district to cover the gap. Sable finally moved out on her own. A studio apartment she can barely afford on a retail paycheck. Still sending nothing toward anyone but herself. Briar is raising Owen alone, working the front desk at a dental office 2 towns over, living in the same kind of smallness she once told me she was terrified of. And I'm in Tulsa. Revenue passed $1.3 million last year. A house I built with my own hands and the wreckage of someone else's worst night. A woman who tells me the truth instead of telling me what keeps the peace. A grandfather's level still hanging on a hook, in my workshop. A reminder that the worst night of my life was also the first night of the only life I actually wanted. My mother told me everything fell apart. She's wrong. Everything finally landed, where it had been heading for 30 years. Just not on the people who expected. A soft place to fall. I was the one they could count on, the one who fixed things. And when it mattered most, they asked me to forgive the people who broke them instead. So I chose myself, drove 1,400 miles, and built something out of nothing. And when the phone finally rang 6 years later, I already knew my answer before she finished her first sentence. Not because I'm cruel. Because I'm exactly the man they spent 30 years building, the one who knows when something can't be fixed. And the one who finally stopped trying to fix it for free.